My name is Maya Carter. I am 31, and on paper, I supervise the night shift at an office tower where the elevators hum and most people never notice who sits by the security desk. In my real life, I wear an eagle on my chest and hold the rank of colonel in the United States Army, where I plan operations that do not appear on any public schedule and make decisions that keep other people breathing. I do this job under OPSEC rules that are simple and strict. I do not talk about missions. I do not post about work. I do not carry ID that would raise questions at a family table, and I do not correct a harmless lie if it protects someone who does not even know they need protecting. That silence is not a stunt, it is procedure. It also fits a family that rarely asks the kind of questions that would force me to choose between honesty and duty. My father is Edward Carter, CEO of a luxury watch company that lives on launch parties, glossy photos, and a last name printed in raised gold on invitations. He measures worth by titles tables and who stands in the spotlight. He wanted a child to follow him on stage and speak his language. He looked at me and saw a girl who liked tanks and airplanes and early morning ranges. He decided that meant failure. He has a favourite line for rooms he wants to impress. She's just a security guard. He says it with a smile that tells people how to react. My mother Linda left him when I was 14 because she did not want to live inside someone else's idea of a perfect home. She moved to a smaller place, taught at a state college, paid every bill on time, and kept her voice steady. On the day I left for basic, she hugged me and said, "Calm is a choice. Keep choosing it." I carry that line everywhere. My brother Ethan is the son who fit the frame. He earned an MBA, joined the company, learned my father's phrases, and now repeats them with clean shoes and easy charm. He is not cruel. He is comfortable. When he says, "You should find something more stable," he thinks that is care. I tell him I already have something stable. He says I do not look happy. I tell him I sleep better when other people can. That ends most talks. The favouritism is not new. When I was 11, I won the county science fair with a wind tunnel I built from scrap plywood and a fan I fixed. Ethan won a youth soccer trophy the same weekend. My father took photos with Ethan and the trophy and told neighbours about our little striker. He walked past my wind tunnel and said, "Cute project," then sat down to watch a game on TV. When I was 13, I begged to go to a flight camp at a small airfield. My father said, "Girls don't need to be around engines, you'll smell like fuel," and signed me up for a junior business camp. I spent that week wearing a name tag calling strangers in a fake sales drill and fixing a jammed copier while a counsellor told me I had an attitude. The boys at the airfield learned to bank and turn. When I was 17, I opened a letter that said ROTC would pay for school if I wore the uniform and did the work. My mother cried and said she was proud. My father said, "The military is what people do when they don't have a plan," and took Ethan to dinner to discuss business school. On Ethan's 18th birthday, my father gave him a limited edition watch and said, "For the day, you take your place." On mine, he handed me an envelope with cash and said, "Don't spend it all at the surplus store like it was a joke we shared." I learned to stop offering proof. I learned to let people keep the picture they prefer. OPSEC made that easier. You do not correct someone who calls you a guard if your cover is a guard. You do not bring a challenge coin to a wedding. You do not park phrases like command task force or joint in a room where they would stick. You drink water, you sit near an exit, you keep your back to a wall that gives you sight lines, and you let small insults pass because they cost less than explaining. My work is not a speech. It is a sequence, breathe, look, decide, act, own the result. When it goes well, other people go home safe and never learn my name. That is success to me. My father does not see it, and that is fine. He is not my compass. Still, I am not made of stone. I would have liked him to show up the day I finished the hardest course I have ever taken. He did not. I learned to celebrate with the people who were there and move on. That is another rule I keep. This wedding weekend is theatre for him and logistics for me. The guest list is full of investors, partners, journalists, and people who wear watches worth more than a year of rent. The resort has in-house security and an outside vendor, which is a polite way of saying there will be seams because everyone assumes someone else is watching the corner. There is a special Aurelia display in a glass case to mark the marriage, and the brand placed on a busy path near a service corridor. The lighting is soft for photos, and soft at the edges where trouble likes to walk. I see these things without trying. I make my own rules for the weekend, arrive on time, sit near an exit, keep my phone on silent, do not drink, do not argue, leave early if my jaw locks help, if anyone is hurt, and do not, under any condition, break my cover. If someone calls me a guard, I let it pass. If Ethan tries to nudge me toward the company, I say no once and stop. If my father uses me to decorate his story, I let the story roll by. I text Alexis, my closest friend since college, and now an investigative reporter because she understands how a room works. I write guest list is heavy, cameras high, exits good, display in a bad spot. She replies, smile. Free cover. Don't teach them for free. I send back a check mark and put the phone away. I call my mother and she says, you don't go to prove anything. You go to be yourself. If he sees it, fine. If he doesn't, you still come home as yourself. I say I will keep that promise. I put a zip tie in my clutch because old habits stay with you even when you wear a dress. I choose flat shoes because marble floors lie. I take a breath and tell myself what I always tell my teams. Before a long night, calm is a choice, keep choosing it. My father believes I stand by doors because I cannot get on stage. He does not know doors are where lives change. I will not teach him that tonight. I will sit where they put me, watch the flow, and leave without noise if the night stays quiet. If the night does not stay quiet, I will move my chair without asking. With those rules set, I smooth the fake name card that says I supervise a building most people never notice touch the edge to make sure it is straight, and lift my chin toward the ballroom doors. I push them open and walk into the rehearsal dinner, ready to let the room underestimate me until it gives me a reason to act. I push them open and walk into the rehearsal dinner, ready to let the room underestimate me until it gives me a reason to act. White linen, soft music, a glass case of Aurelia watches by the wall, and my father holding court like it's another launch. That's the room I walk into. He spots me in seconds, lifts his chin like he is cueing a spotlight, and waves me toward two men with investor badges. This is my daughter, he says, cheerful and loud. She's just a security guard. The men smile the way people do when they think 5 words tell a full story. I shake hands and ask if they are enjoying the food. One says the oysters are perfect. The other asks where I work. Downtown, I say. Night shift, quiet building. My father laughs once, a little clap of sound, and says she keeps busy, then turns to talk about a limited run of dials. I step back half a foot to see angles. The ballroom cameras sit a bit too high-strung on stage and dance floor weak at the side door. The glass case sits near a curve in the foot traffic that spills toward a service corridor. Light is soft for photos. Edges are soft for trouble. Eleanor glides in on cue with a smile that belongs in a magazine. So happy you could make it. Maya, she says, we have guests from London, Geneva, Singapore. It's a very special mix tonight. Congratulations, I say. She touches my arm like we are close and then floats away to greet someone with a microphone. Ethan slides in with 2 drinks, perfect suit, perfect part in his hair. You look good, sis, he says. You thought about something more stable. Our corporate security team is hiring. I have a job, I say. Sure, he says, but something with a path. My path is making sure people leave rooms like this in one piece, I say. He laughs like I made a small joke and offers a glass. Water, only I say. Always on duty, he says. It's how I'm built, I say. He shrugs and drifts back to Dad. A server passes close to the Aurelia case. His shoes don't match the resort standard. The sole pattern is wrong. His earpiece is tucked badly behind his ear, not the in-house model. He keeps scanning the room like he's learning it. I mark his face and move 2 steps to the right to catch his reflection in the case. He adjusts his jacket like checking something under it and keeps going. A floor manager frowns at the path he takes and then looks away when a guest stops him with a question. Another round of introductions. She's just a security guard, my father tells a woman in a silk dress. She pats my arm and says, "Important work, dear," in a tone people save for bake sales. Mostly, I keep people safe, I say. "Oh my," she says, "well, keep us safe tonight," and turns to ask about a yacht club. I let the words slide. Calm is a choice. Keep choosing it. I drift toward the band to test the sound in my head against the room. The service door on the side wall does not latch clean. It sits a hair open. Staff move through with trays. The corridor beyond is dark and quiet. I make a map in my mind stage. Exits case door where a crowd would compress if a voice got loud. A man in a white jacket taps my shoulder. "Do you check IDs and tell people where to stand?" he says with a friendly grin. Sometimes I say. Mostly I keep people safe. "Well," he says, chuckling, "keep an eye on me." I tend to wonder. "I noticed," I say, and he laughs harder than the line deserves and moves away. I text Alexa's cameras high. Exit's good. Display in a bad spot. Staff mix. Cover holds. She texts back, smile. Free cover. Don't teach for free. I put the phone away. Eleanor takes the mic and thanks everyone for flying in. Thanks the brand team. Thanks my father for his vision. My father stands with her and lists cities and numbers that fit on slides. People clap. I count the staff. I count the vendors. I count 3 servers whose shoes miss the uniform spec. One of them lingers near the case again. He and another server share a look, not the look of staff saying you take that side, more like you ready. They both touch the inside of their jackets in the same careless way. I mark the second face. Ethan brushes against me again. Dad wants a photo, he says. Over by the case, later I say. Lighting is better after the band starts. You and your angles, he says. Me and my angles, I say. He grins without understanding and leaves. My father pulls me toward another table with a couple from Geneva. This is my daughter, he says. She's just a security guard. The husband says we rely on good guards, and the wife says, "Do you ever get bored?" "Sometimes," I say. Then the room changes, and I don't. The husband nods like he likes that answer. My father talks over it with a story about a bezel. I let him. I shift my stance to sightline the case and the service door at the same time. The door opens and closes. A stack of empty trays goes out. A full cart comes in. The latch still does not bite. I move closer to test where a crowd would push if the band got loud. I see the first server again. Up close, the stitching on his jacket is wrong for this property. The pants break at the wrong height for staff shoes. These are small details. They are also the only details I ever need. He moves like he is on a schedule that does not match the room. I log him. I slide my hands behind my back, the way I do in briefings. It keeps me from clenching my fists when my father says again and again, "She's just a security guard." I do not correct the line. I do not need the line to change. I need the door to latch the case to be further from traffic, the cameras to catch the sides. A guest leans in and asks if I like my job. I like when people go home, I say. That's a good answer, she says, and I nod. In my head, I run a simple drill. If a voice shouts, "Usher, left block, right, pull the elderly toward the back. Pillar, wrap the path around the bandstand. Keep kids low, move Ethan first, because he is in a choke point by the case. Move Dad, second, because he thinks he gives orders. Move Eleanor, third, because she will not want to move. I breathe and let the drill fade. Calm is a choice. The band starts a soft run-through. The room noise covers small sounds. The two servers with bad shoes pass each other near the case. Their shoulders bump lightly. Both adjust inside their jackets again. One glances at the side door. The other glances at the ceiling camera, not as if he works here, and knows it's blind arc, but as if he wants to learn it and then forget it again. I drift toward the service door and watch a busser push it open with a hip. No click, no latch. I could close it. I do not. I am a guest. I make a note to sit where my seat back will give me a clean line to that door and a full view of the case. My father taps his glass and tells a table the guest list is flawless. Investors, editors, leaders, he says. We brought the right people together. He does not know that rooms are not safe because of who stands inside. Rooms are safe because of how they work when someone does the wrong thing. I see the second server hover near the case again. The floor manager frowns and steps toward him, then gets pulled away by a VIP waving a program. I take a step closer and pretend to admire the watches. I look at the reflection and catch a third server at the edge of it, the same shoes, the same posture, the same habit of scanning faces instead of plates. 3. I only need 3. I mark all of them and walk away before I look like a problem. Ethan returns and says, "You okay, fine," I say. "You look like you're working." "I'm watching," I say. "Try not to," he says. "It's a party." "Parties end," I say. "People should leave whole." He frowns, but lets it go. I stop by the water station line, up my sightlines again and settle my plan. I will sit in the back left quadrant 2 tables from the door, diagonal to the case near a path with room to move a small group if a path needs to open. I will memorize the faces I do not trust, and the one guard who looks alert enough to move fast if I tell him left. I will let the room think I am a guard if that keeps me quiet and close to the place I need to be. I pull my phone out once more and text Alexis 3 staff off pattern. Shoes, wrong. Door, won't latch. Case too close to flow. She replies, copy. Eat something. Low blood sugar makes heroes dumb. I smile and put the phone away. Then I choose my chair for tomorrow, the one place where I can see both the glass and the dark line of that service corridor, and I promise myself I will not move from it unless the room gives me a reason. The morning air carried the smell of salt and polished wood when I stepped onto the resort's main deck. Staff moved fast but quiet, setting up chairs in neat rows facing the ocean. The tide was low, the water calm enough to fool anyone into thinking the day would stay that way. A photographer crouched near the aisle, testing angles while the band tuned soft notes under a white canopy. VIP guests began to arrive in small clusters, sunglasses on voices low. At the main entrance resort, security scanned badges and bags, all smiles for the camera crews filming arrivals. The front looked locked down, but the service corridor on the east side told a different story, open for carts, floral deliveries, and any problem dressed like it belonged. The Aurelia display sat in the centre of the reception hall, already drawing small groups. The watches glittered under spotlights, the glass case spotless, a silent announcement of value. 2 brand guards stood nearby, both sharp in posture, but they moved often to greet guests and answer questions. Every time one stepped away, a soft shadow fell over the case with no one watching close enough. The resort's in-house guards, dressed in dark polos, drifted between the lobby and the terrace. Their routes overlapped with the vendor guards in ways that looked good for photos, but left corners unchecked. I counted 4 blind spots before I even crossed the hall. One sat at the far end of the terrace, where the wall curved inward. Another by the bandstand, where the crowd would cluster for speeches. The third was near the Aurelia case, where a pillar blocked a full view from the main floor camera. The fourth, most dangerous, was the service door I'd noticed last night, still propped just wide enough for a person to slip through. I tested my planned seating. Back row, left side near the floral arch, but angled toward both the Aurelia case and that service door. From here, I could see the crowd's centre and the path to the safe zone I'd marked in my head. No one had reserved the chair, and I intended to keep it that way. The staff bustled past me, some in matching resort uniforms, others in the cream jackets of brand catering. A few faces I recognised from last night, others I didn't. I kept my eyes soft scanning, without locking too long on any one person. My cover stayed the same, just another guest. Just another security guard here because family ties forced it. My phone buzzed, Mum's name lit up the screen. I stepped into a quiet corner by the terrace railing. "Hi, Mum," I said. "You're up early." "Big day for the family," she said. "Thought you might want a reminder, let me guess. Calm is a choice. Keep choosing it." I smiled. "I remember." She paused. "I know you don't tell me everything. Just stay safe." "Always," I said, and we let the call end there. I slid the phone back into my clutch. A text from Alexis popped up seconds later. "How's the circus?" I typed. "Perfect cover. Everyone thinks I'm background." She replied, "Good. Let them underestimate you, but don't let them step over you." I pocketed the phone again. Near the Aurelia case, one of the vendor guards was laughing with a guest, his back turned just enough to miss the man in a catering jacket who had stepped too close. The man's hands were behind his back as if holding a tray, but there was no tray. He stood there 5 seconds longer than a server should, then moved off toward the service corridor. I hadn't seen him at last night's dinner. From my memory of Torres's staff list, he wasn't in the photo sheet either. I glanced at my watch. 90 minutes until vows. I walked the long way back toward my seat, passing the band as they shifted into a faster tune for sound check. The space between their canopy and the Aurelia display was just wide enough for 2 people to pass without touching. In a rush, that would be a bottleneck. I kept my pace slow eyes down, but mapped the path in my head from the arch to the aisle, through the bottleneck past the case, into the safe zone behind the decorative screens near the bar. Guests would see the flowers. I would see the cover. I sat down in my chosen seat and tested the angle. The case glimmered in my left peripheral, the service door lined up straight ahead, past a half-dozen white chairs. A busser pushed a cart through it, the door swinging wider, then settling back into its lazy gap. I made 3 mental pins on the map, the display, the service door, and the blind corner by the band, and promised myself I would watch them until the last guest left. That promise didn't have to wait long to be tested. From my left peripheral, I caught a figure in a white catering jacket moving in from the terrace. He carried nothing. No tray, no glasses, just one hand curled behind his back as if he were resting it there. My gaze dropped to his feet, black running shoes with grey soles, not the polished black slip-ons every other server wore. He walked with a sweep of the eyes I'd seen before, in other places, other lives, not admiring the decor, not looking for someone specific, but tracing paths, counting bodies, noting exits. He passed within 6 feet of the Aurelia case, slowing for just half a breath before continuing toward the service door. That half breath told me more than his whole walk. I shifted my gaze forward, kept my face neutral, and scanned the rest of the floor. 2 more stood out. The first was near the far drinks table, bent over, as if checking the champagne flutes. The moment his colleague in uniform turned away, he straightened, tapped his ear subtly, and shifted his weight toward the bandstand blind spot. The second was already in motion near the lobby entrance, carrying an empty silver tray, like a prop. His shoes were spotless but wrong, matte leather lace-ups with thick soles, more at home in an urban alley than a beachfront wedding. His jacket sleeves rode up when he adjusted his grip on the tray, and I saw a faint bulge on his inner left forearm. Not muscle, not bone, hardware. None of them spoke to guests. None of them carried food or drinks for more than a few seconds before finding a reason to set it down. I made a slow sweep of the room, letting my eyes pass over them without sticking. In my head, I assigned them numbers: 1 runner shoes service door, 2 ear tap bandstand, 3 lace-ups prop tray. 1 had already made his first pass by the display. 2 was watching the crowd density around the music area. 3 seemed to be waiting for a shift in attention, standing just far enough from the Aurelia case to seem casual. A server, with the correct shoes and jacket, walked by me carrying a platter of hors d'oeuvres. I took one to keep my hands busy and murmured thanks, using the movement to angle my body so I could watch too without staring. He had turned his back to the crowd, now fiddling with the cuff of his jacket like it was caught. A second later, his right hand dipped toward his inner jacket pocket and brushed against a rectangle outline smooth about the size of a radio. When his head came up, his eyes flicked not at the guests, but toward one who had reappeared by the service corridor. The exchange was quick, but not quick enough for me to miss it. I bit into the cracker, chewing slowly, tasting nothing. My pulse didn't change. I'd trained it not to. The sound of a violin tuning came from the bandstand. Guests turned their heads. That's when 3 made his move, drifting closer to the display case, as if drawn by the shine. His right shoulder lifted slightly, checking the weight of something under the jacket. He didn't touch it, just confirmed it was still there. My left hand rested on the table, fingers relaxed nails pressing faint half-moons into the linen. If they were real staff, they wouldn't need to check hidden objects. If they were trained thieves, or worse, they were already rehearsing the grab. I forced myself to lean back in my chair, take another bite, and let my gaze slide past them as if I was bored. Watching without watching is a skill that works only if you believe your own disinterest. My breathing stayed steady. 1 circled back this time, pausing in the shadow of the pillar near the Aurelia case. His head dipped just enough to block his mouth from the cameras when he murmured something. 2, now closer to the drinks table again, touched his ear. 3 shifted half a step toward the display. The timing wasn't random. They were testing angles, watching how the brand guards rotated, feeling out the seconds they had before a sightline closed in. My chair gave me the view, but it also gave me the limit I couldn't move without drawing eyes. So I stayed still, memorizing the sequence. 1 signals, 2 adjusts position, 3 closes distance. In another environment, I'd have called it out immediately, moved to cut the triangle. Here, with my cover intact and half the guests belonging to my father's social circle, I had to play it long. I took a sip of water, letting the glass hide my mouth, and angled my phone just enough to see the screen without obvious movement. No messages, no backup. I slipped it back into the clutch. Across the room, Ethan laughed at something Eleanor said, leaning in his back to the whole setup. My father was in the centre of a circle of guests, gesturing broadly as if sealing a deal. None of them saw the triangle tightening around a glass case worth more than most houses. I let my eyes drift once more to the service door. Still open just enough. 1 disappeared through it for 8 seconds, then came back with empty hands and the same slow pace. That confirmed it. He wasn't here to serve. He was here to move. My watch ticked once in my ear, the sound so soft it might have been imagined, a leftover from years of comms work. I let the thought settle. If I was right, they'd make their move before the main ceremony drew everyone outside. That gave them less than an hour, and me even less to decide what to do about it without tipping my hand too soon. I stood slowly, making it look like I was just stretching my legs, and drifted toward the back of the room where the restrooms and service hallway split off. Nobody stopped me. Once the music swelled again, I slipped through the narrow door into the hallway that smelled faintly of coffee grounds and floor polish. I pulled a small black device from the side pocket of my clutch, no bigger than a pager-map finish tuned to sweep common security and event frequencies. It took less than 5 seconds to catch something. Male, voice low, slightly muffled. Hold for Aurelia, stand by. Then a faint burst of static. Another voice copy. Aurelia. My jaw tightened. They weren't just browsing the watch display. They had a name for it, probably their target code name. I moved deeper down the hall until I saw a short, broad man in a navy sport coat by the staff office door. His radio was clipped to his belt earpiece in one ear. Michael Torres, head of security for the resort. I stepped up, keeping my voice low. You have 3 men dressed as servers on the floor who aren't part of your staff or the caterer. They're communicating on a private channel about something they call Aurelia. He gave me the kind of look you reserve for drunks who think they've spotted a UFO. And you are, I kept my tone even, a guest with security experience. His eyebrows lifted slightly in a way that told me security experience was translating to Morgard in his head. Ma'am, our team has this covered. We vet our staff. We've got cameras on every door. Not on the service corridor entrance by the terrace, I said. And your cameras don't cover the blind corner by the bandstand. I've watched all 3 of them rotate positions, check, concealed objects and signal each other. One of them just ducked into your service hall for under 10 seconds. I intercepted their chatter. I tilted the small device so he could see the faint blinking light. They're repeating Aurelia like a trigger word. He frowned, glanced toward the dining room, then back at me. That's a brand display. So, maybe they're just saying the name. And maybe they're about to lift $500,000 in merchandise, I countered. They're working a triangle formation, they've mapped your staff's rotation, and they're timing it to when attention shifts to the vows. They're not here to refill champagne. He crossed his arms, still not convinced. Look, even if I took this at face value, we can't just start grabbing people in front of the guests. The police aren't even here. How far out, I asked. He glanced at his radio. 15, 20 minutes. But they're not coming unless there's an incident. By the time you get your incident, they'll be in the wind. You need to tighten coverage around that display and close the service door now. He hesitated, weighing the embarrassment of overreacting against the embarrassment of losing luxury merchandise on his watch. And you said you have security experience. Enough to know this isn't random, I said. I didn't add Colonel in the United States Army because OPSEC was more than a habit, it was a necessity. He exhaled slowly. All right, I'll have 2 guys keep an eye. But if you're wrong, if I'm wrong, I'll buy you a drink and apologise, I said. If I'm right, you'll still be here to have one. I gave him the timeline. Less than an hour before the vows. That's your window. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded once muttered into his radio and walked toward the dining room. I stayed in the hallway for another beat listening. The voices came again sharper this time. Stand by for Aurelia. After vows. My grip tightened around the device. They just confirmed my guess. When I stepped back into the room, everything looked exactly the same. Crystal glasses catching the light, polite laughter over music my father still holding court. But the clock in my head had already started counting down. I began my sweep like I'd done 100 times before, in places far less pretty than this one. First, the buffet table, 8 feet long, wood frame under the linen heavy enough to act as solid cover for maybe 6 people if we stayed low. I mapped the angle from there to the terrace doors, 17 steps, no stairs but a narrow choke point, where 2 floral arrangements jutted out. The terrace itself opened to the lawn, but the west wind was strong. Good for scattering sound, bad if smoke or gas was used. Next, the gap between the bandstand and the floral arch, 5 feet wide, a perfect funnel to move guests toward the kitchen corridor. But right now it was cluttered with spare chairs stacked against the wall. Those would need clearing fast if I had to use it. As I walked, I stopped twice to smile at guests, one of them a woman in a navy dress, who complimented my earrings. I thanked her, asked if she knew what time the ceremony would actually start. Her glance at her watch told me exactly what I needed 28 minutes to vows. I drifted past the band, leaning in to tell the drummer the lighting made his cymbals glow. In truth, I was checking the blind corner. Still, no camera, no extra staff. I caught sight of one near the drinks table holding a tray at chest height, but not offering it to anyone. His shoes, cheap slip-ons wrong for the uniform, and the bulge near his waistband told me he wasn't here for tips. I adjusted my path to pass behind him, catching a faint smell of machine oil, exactly what you get when a firearm's been cleaned in the last few hours. My phone buzzed once in my palm. Torres's reply to my earlier text, shifted men. Position holding. I slid the phone back into my clutch and started toward Ethan. He was laughing too loudly with Eleanor, his hand resting casually on the back of her chair. Switch seats with me, I said, keeping my voice low. He looked at me like I'd just asked him to dance in the middle of a funeral. What? Why closer to the terrace door? Just trust me. You're being weird, Maya. And you're talking too much, I said evenly. Something in my tone made him push back his chair. He switched, muttering, "Fine, but you owe me an explanation." Now from his seat, I had an unobstructed line to the Aurelia display, the service door and the fake servers. 2 was leaning against a wall, pretending to check his phone, but actually watching the lighting crew rehearse. 3 had reappeared near the kitchen entry, carrying an empty tray like a prop. I kept them all in my peripheral vision. The lighting techs ran their checks again, casting sharp shadows that flickered across the room. The music stopped, then started the band testing their mics. Guests turned their attention to the floral arch, where someone adjusted a loose ribbon. Perfect distraction for anyone wanting to move unseen. I caught the glance 1 to 2, a half-second connection before they looked away. Then 2 scratched his ear, and 3 responded with a subtle nod. I bent slightly toward my water glass, speaking just above a whisper into the small mic clipped inside my clutch. They're talking without talking. Keep eyes on all 3. Torres's voice came back soft, but steady copy. 2 on display, 1 shadowing kitchen. I took a sip of water, eyes still moving. My father's laugh cut through the background, like nothing in the world could touch him. Around him, his guests relaxed, leaning into their chairs, glasses refilled. The illusion of safety was complete. That was both the opportunity and the danger. I noticed a false start. A staff member dropped a fork near the band, making a loud clang. Instantly, 2's head jerked toward the sound, his hand brushing his side. Too fast for a real server, too alert for someone paid to pour champagne. When nothing happened, he eased back, but now I was certain they were wired tight, waiting for a signal. I adjusted my position, 1 leg angled toward the terrace exit, rehearsing the first 3 moves I'd need if everything went hot. My heart rate was steady, but my mind was already 10 minutes ahead. The next time the lights shifted or the music swelled, they'd act. And when they did, I'd be ready. When the lights flickered again, it wasn't the soft kind you get before a toast. It was sharp, uneven, a jolt that made the shadows twitch across the walls like startled birds. My eyes locked on 2. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at 1, the man near the Aurelia display. A small nod passed between them, almost lost in the shifting light. That was it, their signal. The bass from the sound check hit a deep note, a vibration you could feel in your teeth, and under that cover, 1's right hand moved. A second later, the gunshot cracked through the room. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, sharp and metallic, bouncing off glass and tile, until it felt like it was everywhere. For a split second, there was only the ringing in my ears and the way time seemed to hesitate, like the room was holding its breath. Then chaos hit. Guests screamed. A woman in a sequined dress dropped her champagne flute, the glass exploding across the floor. Someone yelled, "Get down!" But half the people froze in place, eyes wide, while the other half bolted toward any exit they could see. Chairs scraped hard against the marble, tipping over as people pushed past each other. From my left, a child started crying. High-pitched and panicked, the sound threading through the chaos like a wire. I caught sight of Edward, still standing too close to the display, his hand slightly raised, eyes darting like he was trying to calculate a move, but couldn't commit to one. 1 was closing the distance gun, sweeping the crowd, his voice cutting through the noise. Nobody moves. Stay where you are. The command froze. Some made others stumble mid-run. Torres was across the room trying to push through the crush of people, but they kept blocking him. 2 had moved to cover the kitchen entry, his stance, wide eyes scanning for anyone heading that way. 3 drifted toward the band, gesturing sharply with his free hand for them to stay put. They were locking the room down. I was already moving. The older woman in the pale green dress was closest. Her hands were clamped to the arms of her chair, knuckles white. She wasn't moving, not out of stubbornness, but because fear had nailed her there. I dropped low, swung around her chair, and used my body to block her from the gun's line. Move to the terrace now. Keep low, I told her, my voice calm, measured. She nodded shaky, and I pulled her to her feet. 2 more guests latched onto her movement, and I steered all 3 toward the terrace doors, keeping my shoulders squared toward the danger. A man in a tux stopped mid-step to pull out his phone, probably to film. I grabbed his wrist hard enough to make him look at me. Not now. Move. He got the message. Near the center of the room, a young mother was crouched, arms around a little girl who was crying into her shoulder. They were half hidden by an overturned chair, but if one's attention swept that way, it wouldn't matter. I moved toward them, signaling the mother to keep low, then guided them toward the terrace path I'd already opened. My eyes never left the thieves. I wanted every movement they made burned into my mind. The woman in the sequin dress, the one who dropped her glass, was hyperventilating against a wall, one hand clawing at the fabric of her dress like she couldn't breathe. I didn't have time to do more than meet her eyes and say, "Stay down, stay quiet," before redirecting my focus. One was maybe 12 feet from Edward, now the glass case behind him glittering under the spotlights. Edward glanced toward the terrace toward me, but his feet didn't move. Pride or paralysis either way, he was locked in place. A hand grabbed at my arm. A woman, mid-30s, face pale. "Are you police?" she asked, voice cracking. "I'm with security. Stay behind me," I said, tone flat but steady. The words were enough to make her duck behind a table. My hands itched for my sidearm, but pulling it now would blow my cover and force me to act before the angles lined up. This wasn't just about taking them down, it was about doing it clean, fast, and without anyone connecting me to anything beyond security. 2 glanced at his watch, subtle but telling. 3 adjusted his stance, clearly ready to block anyone rushing the stage. In my head, the room was no longer a wedding. It was a map, points of cover lines, of sight choke points. Every move from here had to count. I shifted left, slow enough to seem casual, until I was directly in line between Edward and the gun. My heartbeat was steady, my breathing even. Timing was everything, and the countdown had already started. Timing was everything, and the countdown had already started. I kept my stance, relaxed hands, slightly raised palms, forward like I was just trying to calm him down. "Let's take it easy," I said, my tone measured low enough to make him lean in to hear me. He shifted his weight, one boot scuffing the marble, and the barrel of his pistol tracked lazily toward my chest. He was confident, maybe too confident, and that was exactly what I needed. Every step he took toward me closed the gap in my head, the mental rangefinder, ticking down 3 steps to 1. He was close enough now that I could see the faint sheen of sweat along his temple, the way his trigger finger hovered a fraction too far forward. "Nobody needs to get hurt," I added, and in the same heartbeat I moved. My left hand snapped up to grab the barrel, twisting it hard toward the floor, as my right shoulder drove into him, shoving him off balance. He grunted, and I pivoted on my back foot, bringing my right fist up and slamming it into his solar plexus. The air punched out of him in a wheeze, his knees buckling. Before he could recover, I hooked my arm under his and wrenched him upright, spinning him so his back was against my chest, my grip forcing his gun hand out and away from me but toward his partners. The shift in the room was instant. Torres froze mid-step. 2 guests ducked lower behind a table, and the other 2 thieves hesitated. One of them raised his weapon and fired, the muzzle flash flaring bright. I felt the hot sting along my upper arm, the skin burning where the bullet grazed me, but my grip didn't loosen. Pain is just information. I'd learned that a long time ago. Left side, now I called to Torres, my voice, sharp, civilian clear, not barking like I was giving a field order. He reacted, moving 2 of his men to the flank, closing in on the thief near the kitchen. My human shield tried to twist free, but I tightened my hold, my forearm digging into his collarbone just enough to make him stop struggling. Guns down, I told the others, my voice carrying across the room, steady but unshakable. For a second, I thought the one by the band might fire, but his eyes flicked from me to Torres's men, edging closer and then back again. The calculation was all over his face. No clear shot leader in a bad position police minutes away. He dropped his gun first, the metal clattering against the tile. The other followed slower, crouching to set his weapon down like he was trying to buy himself time to bolt. That's when the third, 1-3, made his move. He lunged for the display, grabbing the leather bag I'd seen earlier, and took off toward the service corridor that led to the kitchen. Torres, the runner, I called, but he was boxed in too many bodies still trying to get out. My eyes tracked the fleeing man, even as I shifted my shield forward, forcing him to the ground and kicking his gun away. "Stay down," I ordered, then stepped over him, every movement already aiming me toward the door. 3 had taken. The guests closest to me had stopped pretending not to stare. They weren't screaming anymore, just watching, some in shock, some with dawning realization that maybe I wasn't just the kind of security you hire for a wedding. I ignored it. I couldn't let that be the moment my cover cracked. The leader groaned behind me, but I didn't turn back. My focus was on the bag, the man, and the kitchen he was disappearing into. That was the next problem, and I had seconds to get ahead of it. That was the next problem, and I had seconds to get ahead of it. I cut toward the service corridor, sliding through the swing door. As it slapped shut behind me, the smell of coffee grounds, flipping to hot oil and bleach. Stainless steel counters flashed under bright fluorescent lights, pans hissed, a cart rattled over tile. My sleeve was tacky with blood from the grazing shot, a dark line down my forearm, but my grip was steady and my breathing even. "Clear the line, back wall." Now I said to the nearest cook, voice flat, not yelling, and he blinked once and pulled 2 runners out of my path. The corridor opened into the main kitchen, a maze of prep tables, heat lamps, and low-hanging ladles that would catch a tall man in full sprint. I scanned fast left to dry storage, right to the walk-in, straight ahead to the loading dock door. Then I saw him. 3 had the leather bag clutched in his left hand, and his right arm locked around a young server's neck, the edge of a chef's knife pressed under her jaw. He'd backed up to the emergency exit shoulder, to the steel bar, eyes wide, and hunting for a way out that wasn't there. The girl's breath came in quick sobs. A smear of lipstick stained the edge of the blade. Between us were a low cart, loaded with plates, a damp patch of oil near a drain, and 7 meters of decisions. I raised my hands to chest-height palms open. "I'm with security," I said, calm even. "Let her breathe." His grip tightened and the knife bit a fraction deeper. The girl flinched, a thin sound slipping out of her throat. "Back off, or she gets cut," he snapped, sweat shining on his forehead. The bag dragged his left shoulder down, shifting his weight crooked. His shoes were wet. The oil patch would be a problem for him, not me. "You're already in deep for armed robbery," I said, inching no closer than a pace. "Hurt her, and you're looking at life. That bag is not worth a body." He flicked his eyes toward the door, then back to me. "Put your hands down." "Hands stay up," I said. "Police are in the building. You know that, right? They're not going to let you walk out with a hostage and a bag." He swallowed the knife hand, trembled just enough to tell me adrenaline was burning through his plan. I angled my body 3 degrees to the right, so the reflection off a warming lamp caught his eyes, not mine. "Look at me," I said quietly. "Not at the door." Me. He did, because most people do, when you give them a simple command in a steady voice. Behind me, the kitchen had gone silent except for the soft tick of a fryer. I kept my tone level. I can walk you out alive. But you put the weapon down, let her step to me. His eyes cut to the bag like it was a life raft. Drop the bag, I said. Don't do murder for watches. A murmur of radios bled in from the hall, Torres moving people into place. The girl coughed and he jerked the knife overcompensating, shifting his weight to his left leg to hold the bag higher. There was my window, just a half second of bad balance and eyes off me. I stepped in. My left hand chopped down on his wrist, where the knife handle met skin, a sharp strike that bit the nerve. Pain flashed across his face, and his fingers opened by reflex. My right hand rolled over his knuckles, catching the handle as it fell, twisting his wrist outward into a clean lock. His knee buckled. I slid my foot behind his left ankle and nudged. The girl ripped free. I pivoted, pulling her behind me with my elbow, while driving him forward off his heels. The knife clattered under a prep table. He hit the tile-hard breath blasting out of him, his free hand clawing for the bag strap. No, I said, and stepped on the strap, pinning it. He swung at my shin. I dropped my weight through my hips and levered his locked wrist higher until the fight drained out of him in a ragged groan. Hands behind, I said, and he swore, but rolled his shoulders the way a man does, who knows his options are gone. I pulled a zip tie from my clutch and cinched his wrists clean and tight, then towed the knife farther under the table. Don't move, I added, because people need simple rules when the adrenaline fades. Torres and 2 guards burst in. A second later, faces flushed, radios hot. I pointed without looking away from the man. Weapon under the prep bag here, I said. Plain language, no jargon. One guard scooped the blade into a towel. The other took the bag and snapped the strap clean. Torres knelt, checked the tie, then looked up at me, a question in his eyes that I didn't answer. The first blue uniforms pushed through the swing door, hands up, and palms out, voices crisp. Police, don't move. They took the man, read him rights, and one officer turned to me with a notepad already out. Ma'am, name and role, support, security, I said, stepping back. I'll brief later. I pointed past them. Ballroom, needs medic, elderly woman in a pale green dress, shortness of breath. Mother and child by the terrace, scared but unhurt. Prioritize them. The officer hesitated like he wasn't used to being redirected, then nodded once and spoke into his shoulder mic. The young server I'd pulled free had slid down against a steel table, hand shaking so hard she couldn't hold her own wrist. I crouched and kept my voice soft. You're okay. Deep breath in, slow out. Again. She nodded, eyes glassy, air hitching but steadying. A cook pressed a clean towel into my hand, and I wrapped it tight over my bleeding sleeve, tying a knot with 2 fingers. It hurt, but pain was just information. It told me I was still moving. I stood. Torres hand off to PD and lock that dock. No exits without your eyes on them. Copy, he said, already keying his radio. I stepped back through the swing door into the service hall, and then into the ballroom. The sound changed again, less, screaming now, more crying, more voices speaking in low tones. The crowd had broken into clusters behind tables and pillars, people comforting each other with shaky hands. I moved to the terrace first. The mother and little girl from before were pressed together by a potted palm, the girl's cheek streaked with tears. You did good, I told the mother. Hold her tight. You both stay here until an officer clears you inside. She nodded, mouthed, thank you. At the back pillar, the elderly woman in the green dress sat with her head back and eyes open, a guest fanning her with a program. I knelt, checked her pulse, counted to 10, felt the rhythm hold, then loosened the towel around her neck a touch. Sip of water, I said to the guest, small sips. The guest obeyed like I'd said it 100 times before. Maybe I had. A man with a camera phone started toward me, question on his lips. No, I said without looking up. Stay low, wait for police. He backed away. I tightened the towel on my own arm and stood slow so I wouldn't spook the nearest cluster. Across the room, the leader was face down with 2 officers on him. His gun was bagged and tagged. The other gunman sat with his hands on his head, staring at nothing. The band had gone silent. The floral arch looked absurd in the quiet, a neat white promise in a room that had just learned what fear felt like. Edward stood near the shattered glitter of glassware, Eleanor, gripping his arm hard enough to leave marks. Ethan was 3 paces behind them, eyes locked on me like he'd never seen me before. I didn't stop. I didn't explain. I wasn't for them yet. Medical triage, I told a resort staffer at the bar here in this corner. Stable people sit injured on the floor, heads toward the wall. Water towels, no crowding. He nodded and started moving chairs. Police pushed in heavier, now guiding guests, asking for witnesses. A detective tried to angle toward me but got redirected by Torres, who said something I couldn't hear. Good. Cover held. I walked the perimeter once more, checking for anyone folded into a shadow, anyone quietly bleeding, anyone frozen. I gave out 3 short instructions, 2 soft reassurances, and 1 look that made a guy put his phone down. The spotlight that had been on chaos didn't find me. I didn't let it. I had work to finish before anyone asked for a name. Police tape went up at the ballroom doors, paramedics filtered in with bags and bright gloves, and the noise shifted from panic to procedure. I moved through clusters of guests the way I would through a crowded hallway on base, slow enough to look harmless, fast enough to matter. Sit, breathe, slow, medics are coming, I told a group by the pillar. A man with a cut on his scalp tried to wave me off. I pressed a napkin to the spot and said, "Keep pressure," then pointed him to a chair against the wall. The elderly woman in the green dress squeezed my hand, once, pulse-strong eyes clear, then let go when a paramedic knelt beside her. One of them looked at my arm and said, "You need stitches," and I said I need tape, so he wrapped the graze tight, with clean gauze, left a packet of sterile strips on the table, and moved on. I walked the route again, checking for the quiet injuries people hide when they don't want to be trouble. A staffer stood near the bar with shaking hands. I told him, set up triage here, stable sit, injured on the floor, backs to the wall, water and towels. He nodded like the order gave him a job he could do and started moving chairs. Chain of custody came next. In the kitchen, Torres had the runner zip-tied and sitting against the wall. The leather bag was on a metal table under a towel. "Weapons under the prep table bag is here," I said, tapping the towel with 2 fingers. He lifted it an inch, saw the logos that would be on an insurance claim by morning and covered it again. "We'll log it," he said. Good work. It wasn't praise so much as recognition, and that was enough. Back in the ballroom, the detective wave arrived, 1 officer with a notepad, another with a recorder, a third just watching faces. "Ma'am, we'll need your statement." The first one said polite but firm. Torres looked at me like he expected me to say no. I didn't. Where I asked. They led me to a small management office off a quiet hall. Beige walls, a round table, a humming mini-fridge. The recorder went on with a click. They asked for name and role. "Maya Carter," I said, "support security for the event." I took out the cover ID from my clutch building security supervisor vendor, authorization tucked behind it, and placed it on the table. The detective glanced at it, then at me. "Walk us through from the beginning," he said. I kept it simple and straight. I told them what I saw first: wrong shoes on 3 servers' earpieces, tucked badly scanning faces, not trays a service door that didn't latch a display worth too much money placed in bad flow. I explained the radio chatter I caught in the service hall Aurelia after vows and how I flagged Torres without making a scene. I said I moved guests toward the terrace, and I took the gun when he closed distance, and I pursued the runner to the kitchen when he grabbed a hostage. I used words like pull and twist and drop and secure, not the other words I knew. I gave them times and positions and kept myself out of the story except where I had to be. The detective stopped me once. Where did you learn to do that? Disarm, I shrugged a little. Years on the job. Private sector drills. He watched me for a beat, then kept writing. When I finished, he recapped it back to me in a flat voice, checked the recorder light and said, "We may have follow-up questions." I said, "You can reach me through Mr. Torres," and he nodded, understanding that some people prefer a layer. Outside the office, the media had arrived, too many lenses, too many microphones, a press instinct for blood and story. They formed a loose funnel in the lobby by the elevators. "Are you law enforcement?" someone called. "Name, who trained you?" I kept my face neutral and my voice low. "I'm with security." No comment. I walked past them and didn't look back. Torres intercepted me near the doors. "They'll want a spokesperson," he said. "Talk to the resort," I told him. "It's your house." He exhaled through his nose, half a laugh, half relief. "We'll handle it." He glanced at my arm. "You sure you're all right?" "I'm fine," I said, and we both knew fine meant bandaged and upright. I found water took 2 long drinks, and finally let my eyes land on my father. He stood in the corner of the ballroom with Eleanor at his elbow, and 2 partners hovering near him like bodyguards. His tie was crooked. For once, he looked like a man, not a brand. He stepped toward me with a stiff smile and said, "Good work tonight. We appreciate your assistance." The words had the shape of gratitude and the temperature of a press release. "Glad you're safe," I said. Eleanor added. "Thank you," then touched her necklace and looked anywhere but my face. It was a clean exchange, polite distant meant for onlookers. I didn't press for more. Ethan waited until they drifted away, then came closer, eyes flicking to the blood on my sleeve and back to mine. "Are you okay?" he asked, quieter than I'd ever heard him. "It's a graze," I said. He tried to make a joke and failed. "How did you do all that?" "I did my job," I said, and pointed him toward the chairs near triage. "Sit with Dad. Drink water." He nodded, then stopped like he wanted to say something else. Nothing came, so he went. I took the stairs to avoid the reporters and walked the long hall to my room. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the quiet felt heavier than the ballroom noise. I turned on the bathroom light, unwrapped. The gauze washed the blood away under cold water until the pink faded down the drain and pulled new sterile strips tight. The skin throbbed. It felt honest. I changed into a t-shirt and sat on the bed, with my phone face down in my palm, counting to 40 before I flipped it. 2 messages. "Mum, you okay?" I called. I'm fine," I said. A scratch. "Calm is a choice," she said. "Still choosing," I said, and we let the silence say the rest. Alexis Press sniffing around. "Are you giving a statement?" I texted back. "No names. PD took statements. Staying dark." She replied with a thumbs up and a line. "Let them guess." I opened my notes app and wrote a quick log time stamps locations, the sequence from first sighting to last handoff. The exact phrases I used when adrenaline was high. It's a habit that keeps memory honest later, when stories get messy. A knock came, 2 short, 1 long. Torres. I cracked the door. He stood there with that end-of-shift face every security lead gets after a long night. "All in custody," he said. "Runner leader the 3rd. PD says the bag ties to at least 3 other robberies this year." I nodded. "Good." He glanced at my bandage at the tidy room behind me, back to my face. "Look, I've worked with a lot of contractors," he said. "You were calm under fire. You kept people moving. Saved my team from having to play catch-up on a bad angle. If you ever want to send a resume..." He let it hang. "Thanks," I said. "I'll write a short report for you. Just operational notes." "Appreciate it," he said. "Press is asking for a hero." I told them we had a lot of good staff tonight. "That's the line," I said. He grinned. once tired and real, then left me to the hum of the air conditioner and the ache settling in my arm. I switched off the light and sat at the window for a minute, looking at the black ocean and the faint glow from the terrace where staff were still sweeping glass. The adrenaline was gone. The small shake in my hands took its place and then slowly left. Morning would bring cameras and statements and more chances to say nothing. I planned to stay invisible, keep my head down, fly home, and let the resort PR fill in the blanks with whatever made their night look best. The day had other plans. By brunch, the resort felt like it was pretending to be normal. Soft light through high windows, coffee smell, low voices, a buffet that no one touched much. I kept my sleeve rolled down over fresh strips and walked in with the kind of face that says, "I am fine, don't ask." Torres met me at the door and said press is outside. We'll keep them out. I nodded and said I won't be long, because my plan was simple. Confirm a few details. With a detective, let a medic look at the bandage, then leave. My father stood near a high top with Eleanor and 2 investors. Ethan hovered at the edge like he wasn't sure if he should be closer or farther away. A TV mounted on the wall flipped to CNN. The volume ticked up and the red banner slid across the screen. Breaking news. The anchor said, "We're learning new details about the attempted armed robbery at a luxury resort wedding last night. Sources credit a security supervisor on site with quick action that likely saved lives." The lower third read, "Security supervisor foils armed heist at society wedding." B-roll rolled, blurred CCTV of a woman steering guests toward the terrace, a quick disarm near a glass display, a kitchen door slamming as a hostage is pulled to safety. No names, no rank, just the job. Heads turned. Edward had a champagne flute because someone thought brunch needed a toast. His fingers slipped. The glass hit tile and shattered in a clean, bright sound that cut through every conversation. People looked at the floor, then at him, then at the TV, then at me. I stepped out of my corner and stopped 3 feet from him. I didn't raise my voice. Still, just a security guard, Dad. I said it like a fact, not a stab. The words landed anyway. His mouth opened, then closed. He glanced at Eleanor, who had nothing ready to say. Ethan's eyes went from the screen to me and stayed there like something finally lined up in his head. A server bent to sweep the glass. The room held still. The door opened behind me. Shoes on tile. A man with short grey hair and a straight back came in with a uniformed officer. General Alexander Pierce didn't need an introduction. Half the room knew him from magazine profiles and charity dinners. He looked around, once saw me and stopped. His face changed by a degree only I would notice something like relief and pride with no showy edges. He stepped forward. The officer with him paused without being told. The general drew a clean line to where I stood, heels down, shoulders squared, and the room somehow found a way to give him space. He came to a halt 2 paces out, brought his hand up and held a crisp salute that would have passed anywhere. "Colonel Carter, ma'am?" The words were loud enough to carry to the back wall. You could hear the inhale around us, a full-body reaction from people who came here to eat fruit and make small talk. The title hung in the air like a bell that doesn't need to be struck again. I returned the salute with a small nod. No need to give the room more than it already had. "Good to see you, sir," I said. That was all. No unit names, no mission hints, nothing to feed anyone's curiosity. He dropped his hand and shifted just enough to address the nearest cluster without turning his back on me. "She acted with exceptional judgment last night." He said simple and public, and then he let the silence take that in. Edward didn't move. His eyes were on me then, on the general, then back on me. I could see the math he was doing and how every line item kept changing values. Ethan's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds, shock something like awe, and then guilt, because he had played a part in a story that was never true. Eleanor recalibrated fast. She straightened her shoulders and said in a softer voice than I'd ever heard from her, We didn't know." "You weren't supposed to," I said, still calm. "It's safer that way." A reporter tried to angle through the doorway with a mic, but Torres and the officer who came in with the general closed ranks instinctively. "No questions in here," Torres said, and for the first time he added "ma'am" when he looked at me. A small word, but it drew a line under everything the room had just learned. The investors who had smiled at me last night like I was background took a half step back to clear a path they didn't know I would need. Someone muted the TV. The sound died and left us with the quiet that follows a truth you can't argue with. Edward tried again. He said, and then the rest didn't come. He wasn't a man who lacked words, but this was not a press release and not a negotiation. I let the pause sit. He finally said, "Why didn't you tell me, OPSEC?" I said. "And because you never asked in a way that would let me answer." He took that like a hit he couldn't dodge. The general gave me a look that said he had other places to be and had already done what he came to do. He touched 2 fingers to the edge of his cap and said, "I'll leave you to your family," then turned and walked out, taking the officer and the pressure with him. The room sagged a little, as if someone had let air out slowly instead of popping a balloon. Torres clicked the TV off completely and moved to a wall like a good guard does when the temperature drops. Eleanor stepped closer, not so close she'd crowd me. "Can we talk somewhere private?" she asked. Her voice held none of last night's gloss. I looked at Edward. 5 minutes, I said. "Then I'm done for the day." He nodded like he knew this was not the time to argue terms. Ethan came to my other side and spoke low. "You saved him," he said. "You saved all of us." "I did my job," I said, "and I meant it." He swallowed. "I said things I shouldn't have." He added, not yet an apology, but on the road to one. "We'll talk later," I said. "Drink some water." He almost smiled, then didn't. We moved to a small lounge off the main room, 4 chairs, a plant, a window, with the ocean doing its ocean thing beyond the glass. I stayed standing because sitting felt like giving away ground I had just spent years holding. Edward stayed standing too, hands loose at his sides. He looked older than he had yesterday, which felt honest. "I owe you an apology," he said, and stopped to find the rest. Behind the door, a fork clinked. Someone laughed too loudly and then hushed themselves, life trying to keep going. I didn't fill the silence for him. He did it himself. "Not just for last night," he said, voice lower. "For a lot of years." Eleanor put a hand on the back of a chair and didn't speak, which was the right choice. "I don't need a speech," I said. "I need you to understand that I didn't become valuable because a camera caught me working. I was already valuable." He nodded slow, like the motion hurt a muscle he hadn't used. "I understand more today than I did yesterday," he said. "That's not enough," I said. "But it's a start." "It is," he said. He looked at the bandage on my arm. "Does it hurt?" "It's fine," I said. "Pain is just information." He almost smiled at that, a new shape on his face. "I'd like to keep talking," he said, privately. "When you're ready." "We'll see," I said. "Boundaries first, then decisions." We went back into the main room. The brunch had found a cautious rhythm. People pretended to eat. Police took names at a side table. The air felt different. Not because of rank, not really. Because the story had changed hands. He finally had questions. I finally had boundaries. We stepped back into the small lounge and I stayed by the window because I needed the ocean as a straight line in my head. Edward stood across from me, hands open, the posture of a man who was used to holding court and now wasn't sure where to put his voice. He said, "I owe you an apology," and when I didn't fill the space, he added, "For last night. For the years before last night. For saying just. For not asking." I let him speak it plain. "Thank you," I said. "Here are my lines. OPSEC means I cannot give you details. Not then, not now. I don't need you to brag about me in public or to explain me to your friends. I need respect in private and restraint in public." He nodded like the motion had weight. "When I introduce you," he said carefully, "I'll say, 'This is my daughter Maya. She works in security.'" That's it, I said. He glanced at the bandage on my arm. "Is there anything you need from me right now?" "Consistency," I said, "and no more rankings." Eleanor stood by the chair with her fingertips on the backrest and said, "Understood," in a voice without gloss. Edward asked one more question that reached past my lines. "Were you ever in?" And I cut him off with, "That's not for brunch," and he took the correction without a fight. He stepped back. "I'll give you space," he said. Ethan knocked on the open door like we were strangers, about to meet for the first time. 3 minutes, he asked. I nodded. He came in, shut the door with his heel, and tried to hold my eyes the way people do when they want to skip to the end. I said things that were lazy, he began. I thought listening and repeating Dad made me safe. It did, I said. For you, he swallowed, you carried a different weight. I didn't see it. That's on me. I took the water bottle he offered and said, different paths, different weights. Don't use me to rebel. Don't use me to prove you're right. Be accountable for your lane. He said, thank you for keeping us alive. It was small and true and enough for today. We left it there. I found a quiet spot near a service elevator and called Mum. She answered on the first ring like she'd been sitting with the phone in her hand. You chose calm at the right time, she said, without hello. I sat on the low bench and let my shoulders drop. Still choosing, I said. Good, she said. You don't need him to be perfect to heal your peace. We talked for 2 minutes about dinner plans next week and her new class of little kids and the way the ocean sounded behind me. Who gets your energy, she said before we hung up. That's a choice too. I went back to my room, showered, changed into clean clothes, and packed slow. The knock came mid-afternoon. 2 short, 1 long. General Pierce in civilian jacket, no cameras. He didn't come in. He handed me a plain envelope and said, internal commendation. Not for display. I said, thank you, sir. He said, keep your head down, which was our way of saying, be careful, without saying why. After he left, I set the envelope on the desk and didn't open it yet. I wrote a short email to Torres with 3 bullet points, close the service door with a positive latch, add a camera to the bandstand blind corner, run a simple evacuation drill that moves people to the terrace in 2 files. Hit send, Alexis texted, press is still guessing. You did right staying dark, and I replied, let them guess. The resort and the police put out a joint statement. By evening, an on-site security supervisor acted decisively. All suspects in custody. Investigation ongoing. No name, no rank. Good. The next week, I was back at my unit in a windowless room that smelled like coffee and dry erase markers. We did a quiet debrief, not the kind with a podium. I gave a clear timeline, took notes, answered what I could, declined what I couldn't. In a small meeting later, the general set the commendation on the table and slid it toward me. No applause, no photos. A teammate tapped a challenge coin once against the wood and left it by my elbow. I nodded and put it in the drawer. Back to work, I said, and that was the end of ceremony. Outside, in the civilian world, life kept going without me in the frame. A glossy blog guessed at my name and got it wrong. The brand sent a typed thank you to the resort staff. Good enough. I did not correct the record. 2 weeks after the wedding, Edward and Eleanor hosted a fundraiser for first responders. I went because Mum wanted to go and because standing in the back row with a plate of pasta salad is still standing. Edward took the small stage and spoke about service in a way that landed better than anything he'd tried before. He didn't list numbers or donors. He said, this is my daughter, Maya. She works in security. And then he stepped aside like a man learning how not to take up all the air. People clapped once, then moved on to the point of the night which was not us. On his desk later, among the framed magazine covers, there was a new photo, a simple one of dinner at my place. 4 plates, a crooked candle, nobody looking at the camera. We had that dinner on a Tuesday. I made spaghetti and salad. He brought bread and didn't burn it. He asked, "What do you need from me?" And I said, "Show up. No more rankings." He said, "Okay," and he meant it. We set a rule for the table: no work talk, no titles. We talked about Mum's school, Ethan's terrible fantasy league, picks a movie none of us had seen, but all of us rated anyway. After they left, I washed dishes and caught myself touching the thin line of a scar on my arm, the kind that fades to a quiet mark. It felt like the right kind of permanence. I slept hard and woke before sunrise. The ocean was a grey strip outside my window. I walked the beach with my phone on silent and let the offshore wind flatten the noise in my head. Worth isn't a title. It isn't a headline or a salute in a crowded room. It's the work you do when people need you done right and done clean, even if no one learns your name after. Back upstairs, I opened the envelope at last. A simple letter. The words were plain judgment, initiative, restraint. I put it back and closed the drawer. On the flight home later that week, a man across the aisle told his seatmate a loud story about a wedding he'd seen on TV where some security woman saved the day. He got most of it wrong, and all of it dramatic. I let him have it. People like stories. I like maps. Before we landed, I sent one last email to Torres. "Thanks again, let me know if you implement the drill," and a text to Alexis. "This one stays off the record." She replied with a heart and always. When the wheels touched down, I felt the quiet click I always chase after a long job. No title had changed who I was. The only thing that changed was who finally saw it. That was enough.